then huge influx of money into the department. Those programs generally lead to capitalized assets, construction in progress, potentially impairment of older assets that were damaged or now being taken out of service. So that's certainly an area of things that can go wrong. Reorganizations, both in the CFO financial management organization and in the organization in general, always create a risk to the audit. And then personnel shifts. New people have come in both at the staff level who do the real work in terms of the accounting work, or at the leadership level. Those create potential problems. So that's a key thing. The more you can anticipate these problems, the better off you will be. And then again, at the bottom is a key point, getting that support of the CFO and other key executives. When I've had new people come in, we've often made a point to go out and have briefings on the audit up front, early in the audit, what the audit entails, how it's going to focus on your area, what were the big problems last year, how you can help us. That's generally proven to be a useful tool. We've also done, and I've done this both at the headquarters and the component level, audit training for people who don't necessarily work with the auditors all day, maybe in a particular program office, but the auditors want to talk to them because their program is building internal use software or building real estate structures. Getting them trained on what to say and not to say to the auditors, how to respond to questions, answer the question, nothing more, don't expound, don't editorialize. Keep your personal views to yourself. That coordination generally goes a long way. Next slide. Communication is key. Communication can make or break the audit. It happens every year with the financial audit. KPMG will come to us, either to myself, James, Roberto, and we've got a problem with this component. Happens every year, all the time. Generally, that is a communication failure. Something has gone wrong and the communication hasn't been right. And as a result, you have the uncomfortable situation of an issue being elevated to DHS headquarters, which, having myself been at a component for a number of years, hate it. But it's what happens, and it can be avoided with effective communication. And here are some communication tips. So, on the auditor side, it's reasonable to expect, in fact, as part of their professional standards, that they keep the auditee well informed. They need to share potential issues and plan procedures, and they need to report results timely. And as the audit liaison, you have every right to make it clear that this is your expectation. It is not reasonable, and this happened last year at one of the components, to drop a load of findings on you NFRs 2 or 3 days before the audit's over and say, oh, by the way, we need these signed tomorrow. And now if you communicate up front now, and part of that is, working with them, getting your deliverables in on time. This is a two-way street. And responding to draft NFRs. But if you communicate with them effectively, that situation should be preventable. On the auditee side, your responsibilities, share problems and concerns as quickly as possible. If something's coming up there that there's an ADA violation in the works, it's probably best to tell the auditors, because they're prone to find out about it secondhand, and it's a lot better if you hear about it, you tell them, and they hear about it from you firsthand. Here's one. You're going to terminate a major contract. It's going to be in the news. That would be something to make certain that the auditors are hearing about from you first, and not from the IG or CNN News or something. Communicate delays. As I said, as early as possible. The time to communicate that something's going to be late is not at 4 o'clock when it's due at close of business that day an hour later. But generally, you have an idea based on the workload and how things are going. And this is just too much. We're not going to get all this done this week. So if things are due Friday and you've got 14 things, it's Monday morning, we can only do 7. Monday morning is the time to have that conversation about getting an extension. Don't wait until the last minute. It just leads to frustration and on the part of the auditors, especially with KPMG, and I'll tell you why this is real. They like to have their people work over the weekend, particularly as you get late into the audit. So they're going to have people, in the office Saturday, Sunday, and they're going to be expecting to review deliverables, PBCs, which they had with the Friday due date. If they don't come in, they can't do that work. Now, that may well result in their staff getting the weekend off, which they might like, but it just puts them further behind. So this, communicating delays as early as possible is a key thing. And then serving as a liaison with the program personnel, I talked a little bit about it. We're all professionals, accountants, CPAs, in many cases understand what the auditors are looking for. Our people in the different program offices may not. So training them and basically trying to be a front where you can, a go-between, and kind of keep the auditors off the backs. That usually is helpful, particularly with walkthroughs, getting people prepped up, doing a dry run of a walkthrough so it goes smoothly. All right. PBC deliverables. Talked a lot about PBCs already in the context of some of the other slides. Just a couple of points. Third bullet down, take precautions to protect data. With the KPMG audit, they do not want to receive any personally identifiable information unless it is absolutely necessary. And they've told us this time and time again. So if they've asked for something that is, in order for you to answer the mail, you have to provide PII, talk to them about it. Say, do you really need this? Is there any way we can work around it? If not, then make sure you communicate and upfront exactly how we're going to transmit it to ensure it's secure. Because if they accidentally come into PII, and I have a couple real-life examples on the next slide, that wasn't secured, they have to jump through hoops with the IG to report it. It's a very painful process for them. So you want to really pay attention to that on giving PII to the auditors. And then the last one is to make sure your responses to PBC items are truly responsive. Here's an example of a non-responsive PBC. So in your general ledger, you have an obligations balance of 4801 and 100 million. And the auditors asked for, give me a detail, a list of all your obligations, your UDOs. It needs to add up to the amount in your general ledger. You had a case last year where one organization submitted it and it didn't. It was way off. And this led to an NFR. It was a self-inflicted wound because they just had a mistake in the report. But again, it goes back to quality assurance, checking all of these items before they're given to the auditors. The audit liaison should be looking at all the PBC deliverables with the eyes of the auditor. Is this going to get what they want? And if not, stop it and save yourself some frustration and pain. Okay, I said I had some real-life examples on the next slide, but that's one more slide ahead. Quality PBCs. One more point, second arrow down, consider the assertions being tested. So the auditors are looking for, the classic assertions, accuracy, completeness, valuation. If you understand what they're trying to get to, that will generally help you make sure that the PBC item is answering the mail. I already talked about performing a quality review prior to submitting anything to the audit team. Someone in-house should be checking it, particularly if it was generated from an office outside of the CFO financial management organization. And then one thing you can do, last bullet, explain to the auditor how you would audit the balance. And this goes back to my early comment about your internal control testing. You may have pretty good ideas on how they can assure themselves that this is a complete population or that this is an accurate list of obligations. So feel free to tell them. And they may, they generally are, to be quite honest, looking for ways to make their life easier. So if you have a suggested approach, there's nothing that says you can't share it and suggest it with the auditors. Worst thing they can do is not accept it. All right. Real-life examples of bad PBCs and DHS. These are all true stories. The perpetrators will remain nameless. Scenario 1. Excel spreadsheet was provided to the auditors as a PBC item. The spreadsheet had hidden columns. We've all done this. A, B, C, and then the next column is H. You unhide D, E, F, and G. What was there? Aha! Social security numbers. Not a very effective way to secure your data. And that led to a PII violation, which KPMG had to report to the IG, and it was just unpleasant all around. Scenario 2. The auditors requested from one organization a payroll reconciliation as a PBC item. Right on time, the component provided the reconciliation spreadsheet. The spreadsheet showed the differences with no reconciliation. It said, unreconciled difference. Didn't really answer the mail. You would have been better off asking for an extension and trying to reconcile it, or at least explain, we're partially done, here's what we can give you. But this was an example of a non-responsive PBC. And then scenario 3, this is the best one of all. Component forwarded an email message to the auditors. And it was one of those where it had been forwarded 20, 30 times, all these forwarded messages. Most people don't even read that far down, but the auditors did. They scrolled down to the bottom of the message. They saw the comment. If KPMG finds out about this, we will have big problems. So shot yourself in the foot with that one. Again, so be careful with email. I've made many mistakes with email over the course of my career, forwarded things that didn't intend to get forwarded, or you're typing someone's name, you're trying to send it to John Smith, and you put in John, and it goes to John Sanborn by accident. Send something to the auditors by accident. Just the lesson from that is be careful with the PBCs. All of these have actually happened, and there are more, but in the interest of time, I just thought these were three good ones. All right, last slide. PBC considerations and alternatives. If a PBC item, the auditors have asked for something, it's difficult to generate. They want a report, your system cannot produce that particular report. Discuss it with the audit team. Explain the level of effort needed to prepare. If you're going to have your programmer come in and spend 30 hours building a custom report, that's probably not an effective use of government resources, and there's probably another way to get them what they need. Consider alternative solutions. And consider the reason the PBC is a challenge. It goes back to communication I talked about a few slides ago. You can usually find a different way to help them test what they want to do, and it goes back to the audit assertions. Few things not to tell the auditors. Don't say that is immaterial. They have their own methods of calculating materiality, different from what we do, generally close, but they never share the secret sauce. It's up to them to decide what is and is not immaterial. You don't understand. Don't say you don't understand. Sounds condescending. Patience, repeat it. Let me help you understand this. Let's see. Well, does this make sense? There are better ways to say that. It is true that they probably don't understand. We've all had this experience. But diplomacy plays in there. And then third, this is another real example. This is really a fourth one. Several years ago, component provided the report to the auditors. The auditor said, "Is this accurate?" Person said, "Well, I wouldn't bet my paycheck on it." Not the right response. The correct response would be, "Why, yes, it is accurate because it was, we reconciled it to this, or it was tested by our internal control group, or whatever way you have of knowing that that's accurate. We ran a script and it generated the same results." So, few things not to tell the auditors. And that brings us to the end of this presentation. Just a couple quick things for you. I have a couple copies, hard copies of our FY18 Summary of Performance and Financial Information up here at the table. First 10 people can have one. This shows each component, its accomplishments, the net cost of operations, and how you spent your money. For those who don't get a hard copy, this is online on the DHS.gov website where you find the AFR and the other financial data. And then secondly, for awareness, again, for all those of you who work with KPMG, this is the last year of KPMG's contract with the IG. It is up for recompete. That competition is going to be starting very soon. In fact, the IG had wanted to get it started, but just like us, they had procurement delays. Happens to everyone. But that will be out there soon. So that means two things. Number one, the auditors may not be able to offer you forward-looking advice on next year, fiscal 2020, because they don't have a contract yet. We had asked in our office for them to provide do some looking ahead on the financial systems modernization, and they can't. They said they couldn't because their contract only goes through the end of this year's audit. Secondly, it means we could have a different auditor next year. Or it could be KPMG again. They'll certainly be bidding, but in the recent years, there have been more firms have come into the market. KPMG still the number one firm in the federal audit marketplace, but there's some competition now that wasn't there last time this contract was recompeted 5 years ago. So just something to be aware of, that there is a competition going on run by the IG, and that could impact our audit, who's doing it for FY20. Once something is awarded one way or another, we'll get a message out through the financial management working group. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. And if anyone has questions for Jim or myself, we're happy to answer those now.
So I have a quick question.
Yes.
Like KPMG is focusing a lot more on entity level controls. Is the department concerned about that? And what are you guys, if you are, what are you guys doing to try to get ahead of that issue?
Question was, it seems like KPMG is focusing a lot more on entity level controls. Are we concerned? What are we doing to get ahead of the issue? So they are focusing more on entity level controls. Part of that is driven by our requirement to have an internal control opinion rather than just a financial statement opinion. As far as getting ahead of it, some of the things we talked about in this presentation are designed to do that, like having audit training for the program people. Just the other day, the deputy secretary, or I should say the acting deputy secretary, signed out a memo to the component heads, and we should probably distribute this through the to the audit liaison community, outlining his goals for the FY19 financial audit, as well as his goals for enterprise risk management. We've had changes in leadership at the top, but fortunately the message is the same in terms of entity level control. The tone at the top, bodies at the top have changed, but the tone at the top remains very strong in support of the audit from an entity level control perspective. Sir?
Since you mentioned ERM, and you said it was in the deputy's strategy, where do you see ERM going? Is it going to be more robust? Is it going to be a greater component of audits and so forth?
Well, that's a good question. Is ERM going to be a greater component of audits? I'm personally a bit skeptical about ERM. It seems to be, at the moment, the shiny object that everyone is focused on. And I'm not sure that it will become a greater component. But I think what it does do, it ties into, and we talked a little bit about organizational awareness, moving beyond, in terms of your statement of assurance and your risk management program, the goal is to move beyond identifying just the financial risks and look at the broader program risks. And the two aren't necessarily separate items. In many cases, a program risk creates a financial risk. such as inadequate funding to do maintenance on this equipment, that equipment could then break down, and that leads to financial risks. So I think there'll be more of a focus on the integration of program and financial risks, but as far as ERM becoming this big change, I'm personally skeptical.
Well, what about from the GAO and
So, I can tell you when ERM first came out, the IG created, must have been 20-some-odd people, a special group just to work the ERM issues, both from the department's perspective as well as internally within the OIG. They have since downsized that considerably. It's no longer a separate organizational entity reporting to the front office, but it's been pushed back to one of the assistant inspector generals, and the number of FTEs working those issues are less than half of what they started with. So I think they saw some challenges in what they originally thought this thing might be, and then decided to kind of throttle back and have a better use of the resources in some other areas.
Okay, probably one more question, and then we need to get out of the room because there's another class starting at noon. No more questions? Please, take one. Yes, take one. All right, if anyone has questions, I'll hang around for a few minutes. We can field some offline. Thank you all for your support this morning. Thank you for support of financial management and the FY19 audit.